The Lord be with you. If everybody would come in and take their seats towards the front, that would be awesome. Don't sit in your usual Sunday spot way in the back today.
Why?
Yeah, front. Yeah, what's the front? Ethan, are you going to play the organ? No? Okay, well, I'll come sit down there. Okay, everyone, so we are going to begin our homecoming festivities. Thank you all for coming. This is a really great morning and a great showing. First off, we're going to start with our wonderful organist, Dr. Ruth Moore, who is, it doesn't get any better than Ruth. So we're going to have her display her talents on the organ. She claims she is a high-maintenance organist, but she is definitely not. She is one of the most wonderful people to work with, and I'm glad that she was here and still here when I came here. So thank you, Ruth, and let's see what you got.
This is it. I was just going to take 1 second to talk. I don't do that very often, and I don't do it very well. But this was touted as an organ demonstration today, and I'm just going to play one piece prelude because we have this group of pastors and so on here that we don't get an opportunity to see very often. And tomorrow, if you come to the service, I'll try to highlight the organ a little bit using the antiphonal and the trumpets and a lot of other features of this organ. But I personally want to thank everybody for all they did for the renovation of the organ. I know it was a huge expense and a huge amount of time for a lot of people. And they contributed a lot to make the organ central part of worship for people that are used to that tradition. And it's been a blessing for this church. I want to point out that I want to thank Don Britton because I know he spent countless hours sharing his passion for music and sharing his passion of organ literature. And this wouldn't be possible with him. And Pastor Caroline, I don't know. And Pastor Caroline, I don't know if she's here. I think I see Stephen back there. Oh, there you are. And she was the pastor here when this whole renovation went through. And I know she spent countless hours and helped us find a very reputable organ person, a company to redo the organ for us. So we're very, very lucky. And the church, I think, is very lucky to have this instrument in play. So I'm just going to play one short piece for you today. It's God of Grace and God of Glory. I think it's one of Don's favorite hymns. So it's a Paul Mann's arrangement. So I turn this off this way. I'm not used to it.
Way to go, Ruth. Thank you for sharing your talents with us. Now I'm going to invite all of the former pastors and a couple other folks like Kristen to come on up for our little discussion. There's no particular seating order, so just... I'm going to be one or two short here. Oh, good thing I wasn't a math major. I was one chair short. I'll send one down this way. And send one down that way. They're not on yet, but... So, this is what we're going to call our little pastor's roundtable discussion. We don't have a table, but we're somewhat round. So, first time you answer the question, just introduce yourselves if people don't know who you are. But my first question will be, and I guess this is not particular to the folks who were born here in Grand Island, but you're looking for a new call. You see the paperwork. In my case, it's the database, the church leadership connection. Why Grand Island? What was it that got you to make the call or want to come here?
Introduce ourselves and then say, why did we come to Grand Island? Why did we accept this call?
Well, whoever wants to go first. Go ahead, Ann.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ann Sucro-Lutz. I arrived in Grand Island in 1994, and this church nurtured me in faith and took me on as the Christian ministry director for children and families and sent me to Austin Theological Seminary to study and be certified. And I am so grateful.
I'm Chuck Olson, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of our coming to Grand Island. I'll repeat. I'm Chuck Olson. This marks the 50th year of our coming to Grand Island. We came in '75. We're here 10 years. To 85. Why did I come to Grand Island? Well, I was born and raised in Minden, so I kind of knew the territory, and I had been doing a lot of traveling in Pennsylvania and with the Board of National Ministries of the Southern Presbyterian Church in Atlanta. And somehow my name got into the mix, and Bud Harrington, who was a cattle feeder, and my dad ran the sale barn in Minden, so they knew each other. And Bud made the presentation for my being called as pastor here. And he would tell a little bit about our experience in Pennsylvania, and then he'd say, but remember, Chuck is from Minden. And then he would tell more about our experience in Atlanta, but remember, Chuck is from Minden. And then he reminded them of the picture of our family where our boys had hair down to here. And I don't know that he commented on that, but he said, but remember, Chuck is from Minden. So when the vote was taken, it was about 400 to 2. And I wondered who those two people were. But they didn't block it, and we had 10 years of enjoyable friendship and ministry here.
I'm Roger Nelson, and I was here from '88 to 2000. But I came here from Lexington, Kentucky, and the phone rang in Lexington, and it was my 90-year-old mind, the president of Five Points Bank. He called, and I don't know where he got my name, but he would not stop calling me till finally I said, yes, I'll come out for a visit. And he had arranged a place for me to preach a sermon, and that led to finally the committee saying he's our next pastor, and I've enjoyed the years here very much. But that's my story.
I'm Kristen Hamner, and I've never been a pastor here, but I grew up in this congregation and was nurtured by many of the people here on this stage. So it is kind of feels odd to be up here in your presence, but I grew up in this congregation and was nurtured by a lot of people out here as well. And I'm so grateful for that. And I serve as a missionary in the Dominican Republic. I was ordained here in this congregation and sent off as your missionary, which is an incredible privilege.
And I'm Kevin Garink. I've been the pastor here since 2020. This would have been, the fall of 2019, and my wife comes home. She was teaching elementary at a really poor, rural West Virginia school, and she says, "We need to go." And I was like, okay. So now we have a system that the Church Leadership Connection, kind of like Match.com for pastors, right? And so we went on, it was a very strange time because we had some interviews right before COVID, went on one in Iowa, and it was a very strange interview. That wasn't going to work. And then COVID happened, and things kind of slowed down. And I think I'd kind of given up at that point because just wasn't finding anything. And then Grand Island just kind of happened to come along. We were trying to get somewhere a little bit closer to Wisconsin, where my folks are from, and from Minnesota, where my in-laws are. And it ended up, Grand Island's only 2 hours less from my parents' house in Wisconsin. So, but I think I called Cami, I think was the first thing, Cami C, and started talking with the PNC, and we ended up making a visit here, and I don't know, probably 6-8 hours in, we said, all right, we found it, we're coming. So, the pastoral search process can be a slog sometimes, but I think it's necessary to make sure you've got it right, and we did, so thank you.
I'm Caroline Price Gibson, and I was here from 2008 until 2018. And I just want to say, when you're living a long way away, you forget how much you love people. And it has been such a blessing to see you guys. So thank you for having us. Our sons were born in Iowa, and we loved Iowa, and the church connection thing kind of mixes people together. And there was Grand Island. Oh well, it must be the same as Iowa. Boy, were we dumb. Nebraska is nothing like Iowa, but it's absolutely wonderful, and we loved it here. So, thanks.
I'm Sue Karras. My husband Rick was the associate pastor here from 1978 to 1992. When we left here, our son was in kindergarten, and now he's going to be 40 next year, and he has a wife and a daughter. So, wow, there's a lot of nurturing that happened in this church that I'm joyful to see him as a parent and a spouse and all that. Anyway, so Rick was here in charge of youth and youth groups, SNARFs, mission trips. And so we were in Arizona and only been married 2 years. We're kind of looking for a change. And we had heard about Nebraska, the good life, that slogan. And we were just in need of a change. And so Rick made a visit out here, interviewed, and we saw that, and we said, that kind of sounds good right now. And that was so true for us all of the years that we were here. I told Bess Armstrong yesterday, this was some of the best years of our life were here right in this sanctuary and in this building. So wonderful to be here and happy to celebrate with you this weekend.
I'm Polly Deppen-Williams. I'm the executive presbyter and stated clerk for the Presbytery of Central Nebraska. So I live in Kearney and have lived in North Platte. But I have to tell Now it's, yes, there it goes. So I get this phone call one day. Hello, I'm Kevin Goering, and I'm looking at this church in Grand Island. I said, oh, where do you live now? West Virginia. Oh, really? I grew up in West Virginia. Where do you live, Logan? Oh my gosh, that's my cousin's church. And he was like, just don't tell her. I promise I will not tell her. So.
I could use my professor voice, but thanks, first of all, to Sandy, Warner, and John for coming over to Hastings and explaining everything to me and making sure that I came. And I represent Kenneth Locke and Alice, who moved from Aurora to here in about 1954, after I finished football season at Aurora, my freshman year. And I don't know the particulars of the call. I just don't know. But it was a nice move, and I was at Grand Island High School and sang in the choir here. Maybe you'll have a question about music. But this was a really important stop for my mom and dad, and they went from here in 1957 to Kansas City, Kansas, a Presbyterian church, and then he became executive presbyter in Jefferson City for central and northern Missouri.
All right, Ann, tell me about your proudest moment of working here at the church. And you're first.
We really should have had these questions in advance.
Then it's
don't
not
you
as
think,
fun.
Friends? My proudest moment?
Or your favorite thing that you did here.
Well, our children's ministry was just the most amazing thing. That's the thing I'm proudest of. When I came on staff, before I came on staff, and then I came on staff, and I mean, we had these vacation Bible schools with huge airplanes in the fellowship hall with they were real, and it was a real airplane, and we had one of our members was dressed up like a pilot, and that's where the kids had their snack every day during vacation Bible school, and they walked up and down the alley with a cart, and we had water slides, and we had science in the summer outside and made a terrible mess and hosed it off. And then we discovered Logos, and in 2002 we went to Valentine, Nebraska. And anybody who went to Valentine that day? Danny, you were there. Anybody else here? And we learned about this ministry model for children, and it just followed Acts 2:42. We play together, we eat together, we worship together, and we eat, pray, worship, and sing. And we sing, and we sing and sing and sing, don't we? There's a couple of our kids here. And that was just a ministry model. This place was full of 125 people every Wednesday night. And we had ratios of, I mean, there was one adult committed to this ministry for every child who was there. It might be taking them home, washing dishes, creating a craft, comforting someone, driving. It was just everybody. It was really beautiful, and it was the kingdom of God, enacting the kingdom of God here. And I'm really proud of all of you for making that happen. Because I know if you raise your hand, if you have been a part of our children's ministry on Wednesday nights, raise your hand. At Logos for Everybody, raise your hand.
Carol, can I say something?
Yes. I also want to quickly say, and then I want to listen to the icons that are here that I've heard about since before you arrived, especially those of you who were here before 1994 when I arrived here, I want to thank this church and this presbytery for investing in me, for identifying me as a person who was hearing a call, had a vocation, and I'm on the road most of the time now on Sundays. I do pulpit supply. Thank you, Polly. Through storms and rain and stop traffic on the interstate. I want to thank all of you for that investment.
It's not a moment. It goes over a period of time, and that would be this place, this building. And the transition that we saw and experienced over a period of years, that continued on and to this day. When we came here, we were very much aware of the pride that the leadership of the total community had about this place, to the point that it became kind of culturally identified with the elite leadership of Grand Island. And one of the first stories I heard about the session was the session's role in organizing on Halloween to patrol around the church so that the young people didn't egg the church. And to see that mentality of protecting a church from being egged, to a church where preschoolers from both sides of tracks, where young people, 70 to 100 young people, danced in Fellowship Hall, to umpteen thousand people who came here after both a flood and a tornado. I remember Leah Meyer saying, "The church was never dirtier and never more beautiful." In those days, the moment that I became really aware most pointedly of this was on the morning after the tornado, after we had hung a lantern in the front, and the word got out through the radio station that the Presbyterian Church was open, and folks started flowing in to try to find where their relatives or where their family was. And we began to organize. About every 2 hours we reorganized. 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm standing along with some other leaders of the church on top of the rubble of Lloyd and Charlotte's house, and Charlotte was the chair of the pulpit committee when I came here, standing and hugging people at 4 a.m. in the morning and watching the sunrise over their rubble. And the church's symbol, I think, is not now an identification of power and prestige in a town, but a symbol of serving even when things get kind of messy.
I have the privilege of coming to this church and following one Chuck Olson. And it was good to come to a place that was so stable because of his leadership. But I've been here a while, and there was our church had a golf tournament out at Indian Head, and someone came up to me and asked what dreams I brought to Grand Island. And I said, well, I'd heard about Habitat for Humanity, but there's nothing about Habitat here, and I'd like to see a Habitat chapter started here. And the guy I was talking to had just moved here from Kansas City, and he said, well, I was deeply involved in Habitat in Kansas, and I'd be glad to do what I could to get us started here. And that was the start of Habitat for Humanity here. And after Habitat started, it was all volunteer and no administrative leadership. And this church decided that they would build the next house totally on providing all the volunteers and all that stuff. And so we built the house, and when we built the house and it was complete, we dedicated it here on a Sunday morning. And the family that was going to get the new house, they were here, and the new owner, this young lady, walked up, and we presented the keys to the house, and you could have heard a pin drop in this place. Everybody was so pleased with what we had accomplished. And that was a story of Habitat here, and it's grown immensely since that. And I'm glad that we got Habitat going in Grand Island. Another thing I'd like to mention here was Roxy Davis was here with the presbytery, and she was very active in the church. She was an ordained minister, and she mentioned to me, she said, have you ever thought of, we had 2 services at the time, and she said, have you ever thought of keeping one service traditional and then having one church contemporary? And I'd never considered that, but I said, well, it sounds like a good idea. So we examined that, and we started the 2 services, and that was a great experience of seeing the people jump in to the contemporary with drama and all that went with it. And we've maintained the traditional, and I was glad to see that happen. But I enjoyed the 12 years I had here as pastor, and I was glad I could follow Chuck. But thank you.
I will say that Roger was talking about the contemporary service, and I think starting God's Dancing Angels with Elizabeth Decker was one of my proudest moments as a child, and it was amazing that this church embraced us as junior high kids to come and lead that ministry and to be able to lead in worship through one of our passions of dance. And so doing that, and then I'll say a few Sundays ago, getting to do baptisms for some of the kids that I grew up with in youth group for their babies. That was pretty amazing too, and some of my proudest moments, along with having a mission trip from this church come down to the DR just last January was another huge moment for me, and the way this church has supported me through all of those different stages, from when I was an awkward little child trying to pretend like I could sing well in the choir, but they embraced me through that when I was stumbling around dancing and pulling hamstrings because I was doing moves that I probably shouldn't have been doing in church. Still, they loved on me and embraced me, and you guys are still loving on me and embracing me in my ministry today. So I'm so grateful for that.
So I think when I got here, right, we were still in the midst of COVID and trying to figure all that out and where we're going to go next. So it kind of seemed like, all right, it was kind of a start over point, and let's figure some things out. And I think one of the first things we did was bring in a consultant to kind of help figure us out, where are we going to go next? And one of the main things that she kind of pointed out is you could either do it yourselves, you can pay somebody to do it, or you don't do it at all. And so we kind of settled on, let's pay somebody to do it. And that's where we started the process of calling an associate pastor, which then kind of morphed into, we hear Jonathan's coming back to live here, and there's Jonathan. So we hired him, and that has been very good for our youth programming and all kinds of things. And all of the history he found up in the attic, man, he's a historian. So we are glad that that happened. We had some things to work through, like a couple of our support staff, like they weren't getting paid very well, and I was kind of looking at them wondering, like, how are they still here? And I'm glad that the session stepped up and we worked through that to make sure that they were paid a good living wage and added some benefits. So for my time here, I've been very pleased with our session and the leadership of how they're ready to do new things and kind of ready for anything that sounds fun, like our corn festival that kind of came out of just having a party to celebrate the neighborhood and invite neighbors, and that has been wildly successful. So that's my favorite event. But I think most of all, I'm just happy for the culture of the church and that we're willing to do some things and enjoy being with each other.
Well, I don't have as many wonderful things, but I want to say second to everything, all the stories I heard, but also was part of. Two things that I always cherish about this church. One is the way, as Ann said, the way this congregation loves its children, and not just the church's children, all the children that come. And that has been, and it dawned on me after I was here for a while, this is also a congregation that has lost a lot of children. I started to count the number of families, and it was overwhelming. And to channel that into love for all the other children, and for the way the children's ministries over the years has evolved is really incredible. The other thing, you come as a minister and you don't think about buildings because you're supposed to be working on people. But the church, this congregation is blessed with such wonderful facilities. And I remember how the transept room was changed and the pictures put up and the fellowship hall turned into a hall we could use for all kinds of things. And then already the services out in the summer and all the different activities in the backyard, which is so beautiful. And I know how hard it is to keep everything up. While I was here, we struggled with the roof and leaks that came from who knows where and showed up all kinds of weird places, and Rich and was crawling around looking for the source. But all of the work that's been put into the building is also part of the ministry. And that's something to be proud of.
Oh, let's see. Well, we were here almost 15 years. Hard to believe, but we were. And so I think just looking at all the faces that I've seen, oh my goodness, I know I'll see more tonight. I think that Rick's vision for Mission in Motion, for the mission trips, was a real highlight of his life. He passed away several years ago, but he had led or participated in 41 mission trips over his lifetime. And so that was a big, big part of his ministry. Now, to do that, you also need adult sponsors, and you need young adult sponsors, and they need to take time away from their families to take those teenagers on those trips to act out your service, not just talk about your gospel and talk about your faith, but act it out and show it in your actions, in your deeds, to people you've never met, who may not remember you when you leave, who maybe not want you there to make you, it's hard for them to accept help sometimes from people outside. But Rick was always very humble about that, saying, we're here to help, we're here to work with you, work along with you, and how can we do that, and how can we share our faith? So I think that was a real highlight for me. I was on a couple of those, and then when CJ was born, I was sort of the support team at home. I know he went to Brownsville, Texas 2 months after our son was born, so that was interesting to say, bye, and have a nice support to help me and the newborn out while he was doing a very important work. So I'd like to really shout out to all those adult sponsors over the years that gave of their time, ski trips, mission trips, all those types of retreats, confirmation retreats, because it did take time away from their own families. But I think that was a highlight for me. So.
Testing. This has been so meaningful for me to remember. And that's a lot of years to remember. And it's coming back. And oh, it's so meaningful to hear all of you. And Habitat for Humanity I get to be part of in Hastings, and we combine. Okay, I remember things, and the first thing I'm going to say that Dad talked about may surprise you. It was Carthage limestone. Do you know that? He loved that. And the rest of his career, he would tell me about churches with Carthage limestone, but none were as beautiful as this. Second, music. Alden Call was a great singer. Dad wasn't, but my mom was. And we sang up here, and the directors were terrific, and I'm struggling to remember the name of the organist, and I can't. Lauritsen, of course. We knew the Lauritsens. Oh, what a great name, Lauritsen. Millard Cates, who was also teaching at Hastings College. And Dale Smith, I think a little bit. And his son then ended up teaching at Hastings Public, where I taught for many years. And they live in Hastings, and I see them quite a bit. And they still sing. Okay, more. Alton let Dad do things with young people. And my dad had this in his head to do ranchers' camp meetings up in the Sandhills. Do you know about that? Halsey Forest has a nice situation for camping and shelters, so we did one there. And the youth did all the work then to set up and host and clean up. And then we did another place up closer to Thedford, but there was a big shelter, and I remember that. And the ranchers turned out, and it turns out when I took Audubon Society and Troop 200 Scouts up into the Sandhills area, I would meet ranchers, and they'd always say, oh yeah, we sent our kids to Hastings College. And I could say, oh yeah, I met my wife there, and I'm teaching there now. So I had so fortunate, but this set the stage. And now I just thought of this, sitting here. Outdoor education is what Dad believed in. Scout troop. We went to Philmont, and that's where I learned I could carry a pack and handle the altitude, and I ended up running marathons all over the place, Pikes Peak Marathon in my 40s, 5 times, with my son twice, and my youngest grandson lives in Omaha, before that Denver, ran it 3 weeks ago. That's 3 generations of Pikes Peak Marathon, and the idea that I could do all the 14ers, 14,000 foot peak, came here. And Dad was proud of being able to do that. Let's see, music. Oh, and then Sandy Warner and I got to do outdoor ed all over the country, and we had people signing up from West Coast, East Coast, and we did Oregon Trail, and we did Lewis and Clark, and we did 6th and 7th graders over at Camp Augustine, and that all started here. Too long, but that's a lot to be thankful for and remembering from my mom and dad.
Yep.
Now, Ann, aren't you glad you sat on that end to be first?
I beg your pardon?
Aren't you glad you sat on that end to be first on every question? So the question is, tell us about your call to ministry and what keeps you going in it.
Now I'll cry. I was born called. I was a 3-year-old called. Grew up, was raised by Baptist grandparents, and my parents were both Baptist, Maxwell Baptist Church. grew up with sand in my shoes, ranching background and cows and the Baptists. Wow, what a theology. My parents were really extraordinary people, and long story short, they ditched the Baptist church for the Presbyterian church because they were, I'm just going to speak bluntly because, well, you know me. They were tired of checking their minds at the door to worship God. And so there I was in the Presbyterian church, Gothenburg, Nebraska, circled me. And these women in this church, and the men, but these women in the church recognized my call before I knew I had one. And they put me in positions of leadership as like 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old. They put me in the pulpit preaching at 19, 18, senior in high school when they needed pulpit supply. And then I went to Hastings College. Yeah, and the man, I can't remember this professor, his name, at the hair, he would stand and go when he preached. Who am I talking about? Scott McCormick. So I registered for classes as a freshman at Hastings College, and I registered for a Scott McCormick New Testament class freshman first semester, and the dean wouldn't let me in, wouldn't let me take the class because I was a freshman, and they were afraid that Scott McCormick would take away my faith. Scott McCormick had been preaching in Gothenburg, Nebraska, in pulpit supply my whole childhood. I grew up with Scott McCormick. So we'll fast forward, and I got to do a lot of interesting things as a grown-up, but always church, always God, always Christ, and love one another, love each other, yourself, and love God first. And so we ended up in Grand Island and have 4 kids, little kids, so I've always been in this building, and I've always said yes to whatever is asked of me. And then I was on the staff here for a long time. Wow, what a great ride. I've gotten to do lots of other things, but it's always here on Anna Street with my family here and the greater family of the church and the presbytery. So I got to study at Austin. Thank you again. And here we are. I do pulpit supply now in the presbytery. I go from Valentine to Superior. I travel from York. Yeah, York even calls me, and to North Platte. And 2-3 Sundays a month, depending on the need. And some are road warrior, and I preach the gospel. And I'm not ordained. I'm not an ordained minister. I'm commissioned by the presbytery. I am a ruling elder. Oh. So that's what I do. I have a day job at a hospital in administration, and the rest is, all church, all the time.
Same question? Well, it happens, again, to be related to a building. And I'll go back to Minden, where we tore down the old church in 1 week in 1952 and built a new church. And I was sitting in the choir as the church was being dedicated, and a guest preacher from out of town kept talking about God not wanting just brick and mortar, but God wanting human lives and so forth. And from where we could sit at the choir loft, we could look across and see the big clock. And I knew that he had to catch the Denver Zephyr back to Chicago at 10:10, and the clock just kept moving and moving. And he was preaching about elders doing this and the families of the church, and how important it was for them to be living stones. And then the clock stopped. It just wouldn't move. And then he started on young persons and young men at that time for the gospel ministry. And finally, the service was over. I think he made it, but I went home to go to bed and couldn't go to sleep. And about 2 o'clock in the morning said, okay, God, what has kept me going over the years has been the community whether in a congregational setting or whether in an ecumenical leadership setting or whether in a habitat setting. It's the people who are there with us and for us, and that's how we keep going.
I'm 90 and I missed your question.
Tell us about your call to ministry and what kept you going through all the years.
Okay. Years ago, I met Vani. I grew up in the Mission Covenant Church, and she grew up in the Swedish Baptist Church. We started dating, and we got married. But then, when I was in college, I got invited to go to Rochester, New York, to a seminary there for a weekend exploring the possibility of a seminary education. And that was an inspiring weekend, and that changed my life. And so then, when we got married, I was ready to go to seminary. And from my wife's background and my background, I wondered, what seminary will we go to? I didn't want to go to either of our church's seminaries. And we looked at catalogs and chose this seminary in Boston, Andover, Newton. And it was half congregational and half American Baptist. And in the church history class, the professor assigned a paper for all Baptists on Adoniram Judson, the first missionary Baptist, or first missionary, started the missionary movement. And then the Congregationalists are supposed to write a paper on the Plymouth colony. So I talked to the professor after and said, neither subject interests me, but I'm not trying to duck a paper. And he looked at me and he said, I was talking about you to the theology professor, and he told me, I've identified that young man as a Presbyterian. And that's when I decided to go and start the whole process of becoming a Presbyterian. So that's my background, and it's been very happy, and thank you.
I get asked this question all the time by all my groups that come down, and I always tell them I have the 2-minute version, I have the 40-minute version, and I have the 5 or 6 hour version. So I'm going to give you the 2-minute version here today. And I grew up in the church here, of course, and you guys all nurtured me in so many ways. But I went off to college, and I came back, and I'd just been on a mission trip to Argentina, and parts of it were great, and parts of it were awful. And I came back, and I was talking to the pastor at the time, and she said, hey, we're going to the Dominican Republic this summer, and we really need somebody who knows some Spanish. And so I prayed about that trip and asked her to tell me a little bit about it. And I had prayed, and I wrote down 13 things based on my experience in Argentina that had to be part of a trip or could not be part of a trip if I would participate. And when she wrote me back, every single thing on my list was addressed. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to the Dominican Republic with the church. And on that trip, it was really transformative to me, and I wrote in my journal, I feel more alive and more myself than I've ever felt before. I'm in a country I know almost nothing about. I'm trying to speak a language that I know this much of, and yet I feel like the person God created me to be in a way that I never had before. I came back on another trip that next summer, and from day one, I felt like God was calling me to the Dominican Republic, and I said, this makes no sense. Foundation for Peace didn't have any full-time staff then, and I thought, when the groups are here, I can work, but what am I going to do the rest of the time? And it made no sense. But on the way to the airport, I talked to Pastora Nieves, and I said, Nieves, I feel like God is calling me to be here. And she said, you can be my other daughter, and you can help us learn English, and you can work with the youth group. And she had the whole list. And I said, hold on, I don't know how this can possibly work. And that night I was staying with the executive director of Foundation for Peace on my way back to Nebraska. And I had decided on the plane I was not talking to him about this because I was sure he was going to tell me I would be a burden and there was nothing for me to do. And I get there and I'm having dinner with him and his family, and out of my mouth spills this sense of call that I had. And he said, I've been looking for someone who can be there full time and do this and this, and you want it, you got the job. And so I came back and I broke the news to my parents and finished my last year of school. And I really felt like God had called me to the Dominican Republic, not because I had so much to offer. I actually thought I was going to go someplace much more remote and much more difficult. And when God called me, he said, I'm sending you back to the Dominican because you have a lot to learn. And I guess I'm a really slow learner because I thought it was going to take me 1 year, and it's taken me 20, and I'm still there, and I'm still growing and learning.
I grew up in the Presbyterian church as well, but a very different kind of church. One of the few, I guess, success stories of the new church developments in the 80s. Right, Dad? It was, what, 50 people in the Catholic school basement? Yep. And started there, and now it's 500-some members, so kind of rare at that time. So very different experience with a newer building and a growing program and all of that kind of stuff. But I went to school to originally become, I think, a doctor, and did biology major, got about the junior year and thought, I hate biology. And so it was time to find something else to do, but had to finish the degree, right? While I was in college, I did a little bit of an internship at the Presbyterian church in town, and the pastor there, Steve Boots, said one day, you should go to seminary. And I said, you should go away. And but somehow that, always kind of planted in my mind and in my spirit, I suppose. After a couple of hard, random jobs after college, I realized that he was right. So that's when I enrolled in seminary, and here I am. I guess as far as what keeps me going, pastoring's not for everyone, and as a pastoral, job market, it's, terrible sometimes. But I think what keeps me going is the variety, right? That one day you're praying with somebody on hospice, one day you're throwing football with kids, one day you're trying to chase bats out of the organ loft. I think the variety and the random stuff and the cool people you get to meet and journey along with is what keeps me going.
I agree with Kevin. Really cool, huge variety of things to do and really cool people. But for me, it's always been much more ambiguous. I sort of thought maybe I had a call, but I didn't know any women ministers. There weren't any women ministers in the presbytery. In those days, there were two Presbyterian churches, North and South. I was from the South. There weren't hardly any Presbyterian women ministers in the South. And everyone I ever mentioned it to said, you're absolutely crazy. I was shy. I was, you just, no, you're not the temperament, and you're a woman. But I ended up going to seminary. I made a bargain with God. Okay, 2 years, 2 at max. And then 2 years would come along. The first church, when we left seminary, out of the Presbyterians, out of all the men, none of them had passed all their exams. The two women, we'd passed all our exams. Out of all the men, they all had calls. We didn't, the two women. But I kept looking, and then the church that ended up calling me was kind of interesting. They'd had a lot of problems, had a Presbytery commission in there, and they decided they could not agree on the candidate. They had two favorites, and the committee was very divided. But they said their second choice was me for everybody, so they got their second choice. Over and over, I've thought about, over my 40 years, more or less, in the ministry, I kept thinking about leaving. And every time I decided I was going to quit, I'd end up crying in the pulpit, which was really embarrassing. And I didn't know why. But maybe I had a call. But no, I'm retired.
Well, I'm not a pastor, but I guess as a clergy family, a pastor's wife for over 40 years, maybe those of you that can identify with that role. You try to be a supportive spouse, and which means you have to balance soccer practice after school with, this is a potluck in 15 minutes, and I said you'd bring a salad, and we're like, okay. CJ, go get the salad, and we'll do that, and then we'll do soccer. So, but one thing I wanted to talk about with youth, Rick working with youth for so many years, I think that he really found his calling in mentoring younger people, because it's great to be part of a youth group, and maybe you're a part of Activators at Austin College, which we've stayed in touch with many years. But then what happens when you're a young adult? You go to college in a different city, your family's not there. How do you find those roots and sustain that faith journey? And that was very important for him. So we would get calls all hours of the night. He'd go in the den and shut the door. Somebody's having a faith crisis. He was really honored to take some of those phone calls and say, just we'll pray about it, and what can we do? How can I be encouraging to you? So I think over the years, you have those structured groups, faith groups, but then you find yourself in a different city or a different church, or where you need to find those connections. And he was always very honored to sort of mentor younger people. And some of those people now have gone to seminary. They're DCEs, they're youth pastors, and that's been a real. And Kristen, who I know from many years here, he was so excited when she has been working in the DR. So that was always a great joy for him, because he had mentors in his life who had encouraged him and said, you can do this. This is hard work, but you can do this. You have a gift. You'll have to, take advice now and then, which is kind of hard for pastors sometimes, to be honest. We all know that. But I think that was a part of his strength, to mentor younger people and say, you can do this. Life is a journey. Faith is a journey. And it's a destination, and we're all not always on the same road at the same time. I just said that to a Facebook friend last month, young person. We're not always on the same road at the same time, but we can help each other and support each other, and let's grow this faith together. And that was very important to our family.
I guess I'm going to focus more on I've been in ministry for 33 years. I grew up in the Southern Church as well. I wanted to be the first woman on the Supreme Court growing up. So my parents, they raised me to do anything, I'll just say that. But one of the interesting things is looking at now being EP, executive presbyter. I've been in all different situations. I've lived in 9 states, but God has really taken all of those experiences and brought me to this position, and it's such a cool job. What's neat about it is every Sunday I'm in a different church, and I get to see churches with like 6 people in Benkelman, Nebraska, where the oldest member just died and she was like 107. I get to be in big churches like this. It's really a joy helping churches navigate, finding pastors, trying to fill pulpits. Thank God we have people like Ann on our pulpit supply list, which is dwindling, but she's still I don't know if you know this, but last Sunday, she got stuck, 2 Sundays ago, she got stuck on the interstate on her way to Minden and ended up preaching. Didn't they hold the cell phone up to the microphone? She literally phoned it in 2 weeks ago. Were you? But I think. Yeah. Well, it just proves that I'm learning, and this may speak to some other things Kevin asked, but it really speaks to flexibility and creativity is what being a pastor is all about, I think.
This is so meaningful to me. I can hardly hold it together. We'll have to have a conversation. Y vámonos a trabajar? Sí. Por supuesto. For an exchange student from Argentina. And as a senior at Hastings College, they got a bunch of us together to pulpit supply, and I had learned to fly, single engine land VFR. We flew into Benkelman, and I supply preached there, and it was a burning hot day and no wind, and I barely cleared the barbed wire fence at the end. I can answer the question about mom and dad. Number one, they Methodist for my mom, Presbyterian, east of Wichita, small rural churches, both grew up on small, poor farms, plenty to eat, but never 2 coins in their pocket to rub together. They met at community college, and they were the first from each of their families to go to college. Amazing. And then Dad chose McCormick Seminary, an inclusive, progressive seminary, and he was president of his class, but there were a number of people there from New Mexico who were establishing Presbyterian churches, and there was a hospital named Embudo. Frank Shorter's dad worked there. He was the great marathoner. I ran once with Frank, but never saw him. And they loved people. They both did. And you know, it's tough. It was so tough that I didn't go into it. I became a teacher professor. Our whole family are music teachers or professors or pastors' wives, all 4 of us. That's the influence. But the key thing is loving people, liking people. We'll have to talk about Scotty McCormick. That's too long, I know, but that's the reason they're there.
All right. One last quick question. When you moved to Grand Island, what was the strangest or thing that surprised you the most?
When I moved to Grand Island, this will be so short and so sweet, I promise. We moved to Grand Island for a business opportunity downtown. My professional training is theater. And we bought the Piccadilly Dinner Theater. And that's how we came to Grand Island. And I learned very quickly I was a country mouse, not a city mouse. And I found myself driving with stoplights because I had lived, aside from my time at Hastings College, I had always lived in a very small place in Dawson County, Gothenburg. And so, coming to Grand Island and becoming a Grand Islander. And I am a Grand Islander, by the way. I love my town. I love my town so much. I love its grit. I love its diversity. I love its intelligence, its can-do. I love Grand Island so much. It is my hometown. I will never leave it. I love how Carney loves to poke at us and say we're a bunch of rubes over here, and here we are. Because, you know, Carney and Grand Island are really different personalities as communities. Nothing against Carney. I love going to Carney, and I get to spend a lot of time there in the next couple of months. But, man, Grand Islanders, what do you think? Yes? Is this our home? Gosh, it's good, and I'm so glad to have been able to meet you and thrill at your time and love in Grand Island.
I was just going to pick up on that because I would say in Grand Island it was seeing how competitors could get along and thrive. One day I said to Rick one early afternoon, I said, Rick, you have anything on your schedule today? No. I want to take you somewhere. So I took him up one side of Main Street and down the other and introduced him to the business leaders of Grand Island. You know, there were 4 banks and the presidents were all members of the church, head of the Chamber of Commerce. You had Skagway folks with the Killians who were in hardware, and you had the Jelinex who were in hardware, and these folks are leading the youth group together. And you had this competitive atmosphere, and yet the capacity for them to get along. This was a congregation of community leaders, and they got along.
I guess I've lived a life that's been all around because my parents were missionaries. I was born in China. The place where we lived in China was bombed and we got evacuated to the Philippines, lived there for 3 years, and then came to this country and lived in the Twin Cities. And so I've been around, and I've enjoyed churches in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Long Island, New York, and Lexington, Kentucky, and here. But you notice all those cities are not close to each other, so I feel like a yo-yo being back and forth. But I've enjoyed Grand Island and glad I came here. And when I retired, we figured, my wife and I, why don't we just stay in Grand Island? It's such a welcoming place.
Well, I was born here, so I never chose Grand Island, but I'm grateful that you all showed me how to be an islander. And, you know, now I'm a real islander. I live on a real island and exchange the plastic palm trees outside Gish for some real palm trees. So,
You know, it's a great town, great place to live. I'll share the 2 things that still kind of puzzle me. Number 1, the Grand Island Northwest divide. The GIPS Northwest thing still, I've read the history, Vanessa gave me the history of it, still doesn't make any sense. And number 2, everybody drives so slow here. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. You know, every day I go down Husker Highway all the way to Locust to go to the YW for daycare, and sometimes the people you get caught behind, it's like, come on, you see the speed limit, you're like 7 under, let's get going here.
One thing, grass. The grass around here is incredible. It's beautiful, and you keep it all trimmed, and it's just amazing. That's one thing. One more thing that I love about Grand Island, it's so diverse. Are the Sudanese still worshiping here? That is so wonderful. And just that was the real surprise, coming to the middle of Nebraska and finding the whole world here, and it was amazing. And the other amazing that this congregation has welcomed many parts of that diverse culture in.
Oh, let's see. Well, I was definitely a city mouse who was not prepared to be a country mouse, but I learned real quickly all different agricultural interesting things and crop yields and all different things that I had not grown up with. Since we left here, we moved to Arizona, we went to Texas, to Iowa, and they are not the same as Nebraska. We found that out real fast. They are their own unique people. But we went to Arizona, Texas, Iowa, New Mexico, Minnesota, back to New Mexico, and now I'm in New York, upstate New York, and I drive way too slow for those New Yorkers. So Kevin, I need to learn to drive faster. I'm on the thruway going 60 and they were going 80 and the cops are going 85. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm a new transplant here. But it was really interesting to come to Grand Island, and the city we lived in was 100,000 by Phoenix, around Phoenix area. And I think it was about maybe 20,000 when we moved here. So it was like, whoa, okay, I need to kind of adjust my sights. But I ended up finishing my master's. I had started at Arizona State, which at that time had 50,000 students. Now they have 75,000. And I finished my master's at Kearney, which was Kearney State at the time. Now it's UNK. And so driving to Kearney and back, I thought, these are two very different towns. And I have, as you mentioned, they are quite different personalities. But so I was a city kid coming into the country and fell in love with it and really still enjoy the town. And on behalf of CJ and all of our family and in memory of Rick also, that we just love this place. This has always been home. Our son was born here and baptized in this church, so of course that makes it very special. When you're a child of the congregation, you kind of always have that tug in your heart for that church. So we bring greetings to you from all of our extended family, and happy to be here to help you celebrate.
My first time in Grand Island was actually in 2006. I was at Hastings College at pastor's school that they used to have every year with the Omaha Presbyterian Seminary Foundation. Anyway, and some people said, "Oh, let's go shopping one afternoon or something." So we came and we walked around downtown in Grand Island. And after that, who knows? I was living in Kansas City. I ended up living in Florida before I even moved to Nebraska, but that was my first experience. And although I've not lived here, yeah, I live in Kearney, but it is weird to see that. And I lived in North Platte, too, for a while, so that all three were different worlds. One of the things, though, I did notice moving to Nebraska is I had gone to seminary in the South. I'd grown up in the South. And when people say bless your heart in Nebraska, they mean it. It's not a bad thing, because if you don't know, if somebody says bless your heart in the South, it's not a good thing. So.
First, a shout out to Amanda and Ruth for keeping the music tradition going so strong. Amazing. And this was the hardest question for me, but I came up with an answer, and you'd never guess it. The aroma of the sugar beet processing back in the 50s caught us all. We didn't know anything about that, our family.
Minnesota, too.
Sugar beets, who would have thought? Anyway, thank you to all of you for coming and sharing about your time here and your ministry here and how each and every one of you has left your mark on this place with what you have done here in God's name. So thanks for being here and sharing with us. And for all of us, it's lunch break, and the next thing we know, at 1 o'clock, the Reverend Sheldon Jackson is going to show up with his horse after a long ride across the prairie, so we look forward to that. So thank you all. And we need a picture.